What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to a new season of InTune Live, and we've got our buddy Branden Lieb from ETS hanging out with us again. Branden, what's going on, my man?
What's happening, buddy?
Let me know if you guys have a hard time hearing Branden or if you get an echo off Branden. I'm trying something new, which means it will fail miserably.
Well, I'm involved in it too, so I mean, it's bound to happen.
You get both of us involved and it's
Oh yeah.
guaranteed to fail. What up, Joe? What up, Kamar? So we were quietly discussing some global beast stuff before we fired up the live stream here, and we've got some other stuff to talk about as usual, and always taking your questions. So if you are new here, new to the channel, new to tuning, whatever it is, this is a great place to come to ask those simple questions, or sometimes complicated ones, and we don't know the answers, but you know, between Branden and I, we probably know the answer.
If not, we've probably been through it.
Yeah, exactly. Or we know who to get in touch with that might have the answer. Well, Andrew, hey Tim, hey Danny. So, what projects you got? Well, first let's talk about your Z06. You picked up a C8 Z06.
I did.
And is it
All
as
its crap.
amazing as everybody says?
I hate to sound cliche, but yes, it is. I guess a lot of it would depend on what you're looking for out of a car. My drag racing days are kind of behind me, so that's not really what's important to me anymore, but more of a visceral experience. The sound, I mean, thing sounds like a 458. I mean, they sound incredible. The DCTs come a long way. It more so in the C8Z than even the C8, but the car handles on like it's on rails, man. I mean, it's incredible what that car can do. But you can't really appreciate it unless you're into road course racing,
Right.
turns, curvy roads. If you just want to go fast, it's the wrong car. Even though it is respectably fast stock, I mean, it's compared to what I'm used to in 1,500 horsepower cars. I mean, nothing's really going to impress you.
Right.
I mean, for what it is, I mean, it's a 10-second car right out of the box. It dead hooks on the street. It's fun. And it's all the power you need in some fun, twisty roads.
So, do you think the ZR1's going to break into the nines? There's no way.
It would have to. I mean, I personally think it would have to. It's makes almost 1,100 crank.
What about, who was it that took the E-Ray and threw a supercharger on it? Was that Hennessy or somebody in Texas?
Boost District.
What?
Boost District.
Oh.
Yeah. Rashawn over at Boost District just put one into the nines. I think there's like
with
one
an
or two.
E-Ray?
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, you think about it, it doesn't take much.
Right.
If you make 700 horsepower on gas, you got an electric motor, I think, on those that make another 150, 200 horsepower. So you got a 900 horsepower Corvette.
Right.
So, I mean, plus it's all wheel drive. I mean, that's a pretty lethal car if you want to be in the C8 game but want to go fast.
Yeah, and that's, I'll be honest with you, probably the one that I would lean towards because the price is reasonable on it, and I don't care about twisties. I just want to go fast.
Yeah, I've done that too for too long, man. I don't know. What hooked me, man, is back at Vengeance, we built a couple cars for some road course racers, and we built a C7 ZR1 for a guy, and I'll never forget coming down the back straight on Road Atlanta, 170, 180 miles an hour, and then coming into, I think it's 10A. I mean, dude, it's unreal. Stopping from 180, 170, and then making a hairpin, S-turn right there. I mean, that hooked me right there. And then ever since then, I got into sport bikes, racing those, and then cars, and the rest is history.
Yeah, well, it's fun. It's not.
It's
expensive. Track days are expensive. Drag racing is expensive, but track days can get prohibitively expensive unless you're doing Spec Miata or something.
Let me know when you have a 7-second car that you're going to keep running and tell me how inexpensive drag racing is.
Yeah, that's true. Andrew says, so Branden, you're telling me going fast gets old. Different type of fast.
It's like cocaine, man. It's like any other drug. Eventually, when you do it enough times, yes, you need more of it.
Right. Yeah. Or a
My
different
first pass,
variation. You need to switch to heroin or something.
my first pass was in a 91 Fox body. It went 14.1 at 98 miles an hour. I thought that was the fastest thing ever back then.
It probably
And then
felt scary fast.
oh yeah, now they got F-150s and GM trucks that, I mean, I think diesels do 13.8. You know, some of those trucks will do 13.8 in a 7,000 pound truck. I mean, it's silly.
Yeah.
You know, now it's
gotten
eights.
ridiculous.
Eights is an everyday street car.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. You're right. So
Take a Coyote, put some twins on it, and a 10-speed, and you got an 8-second car.
ugh, Coyotes. Well, ETS is rolling out something new. Do you want to give me a rundown?
Oh man, you're gonna come out of the gate with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we want to get it in early for the people who are watching this show not live. You got all the details? Is it launching tomorrow?
We plan to launch it tomorrow. So,
And this is. Let me preface this by anybody that's watching this. This is not rehearsed, and I'm putting Branden somewhat on the spot after talking to Mike. So I hope you've got all of your ducks in a row. Sorry, Branden. This is a world premiere ETS offering.
No, I mean we've I mean for a long time. I mean, you know, we came out with this. You know, we were on a pay per course kind of scenario, and I don't know, man. I don't know how to phrase this in a way that people might understand, but you know, we put a lot of time and effort into these things, and it's like I want so badly for this to be out to everybody and being affordable, and I get it. I mean, the stuff's expensive, you know, but and we would kind of price the courses to how much time we had involved in them. I mean, some of these courses have taken me. A Global B took me a year.
Right.
That's a year of banging my head against a wall with stuff. I mean, so, you know, we kind of had to price them accordingly, but it's getting to a point now where it's like, I just want this to be able to be accessed by everybody. So we are going to move it to a subscription-based program, like a lot of the other stuff that you guys are used to seeing, and hopefully make it affordable for, you know, anybody can take this stuff now.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is just going to be third and fourth gen stuff.
We're going to start with
LS
stuff. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to start with LS stuff first, and then just we want to make sure, you know, because right now the guys that do heavily take a lot of our, you know, LS and LT stuff, you know, we also have additional groups where, I mean, if you guys get stuck on the dyno, it's more for shop guys, really. If they get hung up, they have access to me and Mike, and we can walk them through and help them through problems. And I want to make sure we've got the infrastructure in place, because if this gets out of control, I don't want the service to go downhill. Right. It's two of us. You know what I mean? So,
well, on top of it, you know, after talking to Mike, and I talked to you about this a while ago because I thought it was a good idea, especially you're talking about third and fourth gen. Third gen now is, despite the misnomer, you can't do an LS swap for $500. That doesn't exist, but it can still be done cheap with you know, the old 5.7s, 5.3s, and 6 liters and stuff like that. And there is so many people coming to this market, and the way I explained it to Mike is you know, look at the channel like where we're at. We've got over 100,000 people. That's a decent litmus test for how many people are interested in tuning.
Sure.
You know, because I guarantee you, you know, half of that isn't to watch me work on crap, because that's boring as hell. But because of that, there is the interest there, and I think on the LS stuff in particular, all the information's available. If you spend the time, you can find all the information between all the web posts and my videos and 1,000 other people's videos. But for somebody who is more approaching this and locking in and say, I want to learn how to tune, this is a great opportunity to get into a structured course at a significantly discounted price. And it also gives you a better idea if you want to move forward into the more advanced stuff. You want to get into 5th gen and global B and stuff like that. So, you know, you're getting a good taste of it without having to go all in from the get-go. Now, some people that are going to be like me are going to go all in from the get-go regardless, you know. I soak up knowledge like a sponge, but for the people that are on the fence, this is going to be something great.
Well, you know what? I try to fast forward 15 years ago when I first picked up a laptop and started doing this stuff. I mean, dude, I had no money back then.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't have 10 cents. I mean, I had enough to buy a cable and a laptop and do something. This stuff wasn't even available back then. Like, no, there was no teaching this stuff.
Right.
And, you know, when Mike and I decided to do this, I mean, originally we were just trying to work with, you know, more of a consulting thing, work with just professionals that had a couple holes, you know, especially on the Gen 5 stuff. I mean, there's still that computer is over 10 years old now, and people still don't understand it.
Correct.
So we were really focusing on high level, you know, more high level guys. And then I realized very quickly, man, you know, when you start teaching this at a college level, so we do this 6-week program up at the University of Northwestern Ohio. And man, when you start teaching the younger generation, you know, they're 18, 20 years old. I mean, these guys light up like a light bulb doing this stuff. And that's really where I wanted to start focusing on, you know, up and coming guys that, you know, they don't have to face the hurdles that, you know, that we had to, you know,
right.
doing stuff way back when, because it sucks, man. It sucks trying to learn this stuff, especially now with how evolved the controllers have gotten. You're not just going to pick this up one day and just run with it. I mean, Gen 3, yeah, you can kind of figure that out as you go. Gen 4, a little bit more complicated. Gen 5, very complicated. Right. Global B, off the charts.
Yeah.
You're not just going to dive into that stuff and pick it up overnight. I mean, if you're really talented, really, you know, your IQ's off the charts, okay, maybe you can pick this stuff up in a couple years.
Right.
We're trying to shortcut that to significantly less so you don't make those same mistakes.
Well, and I always told people that would ask, like, what can I do to get into tuning? I said, the best thing you can get into tuning is to pick up a late 90s, early 2000s GM platform vehicle.
100%.
Because it is, I'll be honest with you, tuning Gen 3s are easier than any of the standalones that are out there. There's only a couple things that need to be adjusted. You have direct access to air, fuel, and spark without a whole bunch of other stuff going on in the background. It's very simplified and such a great way to get into it. But you have to have that foundation in place in order to make anything else make sense. Well, jumping into Gen 5 or Global B is the death kiss on tuning. A, you're not going to understand it, and B, you're not going to be able to learn it because there's so many things that you pick up from doing 3rd and 4th gen that carry forward. Everything carries forward. Stuff in 3rd gen carried forward to 4th, carried forward to 5th, and now into Global B. And so you've got to know where it started, really, to be able to do it properly.
100%. And not to mention, I mean, when you pick up Gen 3, it'll segue into a Holley Terminator. You know, right. They're very similar, you know, VE based, airflow based. So you can, I mean, they still predominantly use IACs unless you opt for an electronic throttle body.
Right.
But so that's the biggest hindrance with a Gen 3 is the damn IAC. I mean, once you get over that thing, they're very basic fundamental controllers. But you know, then you can transition that into Gen 4. Gen 4, you start getting a little bit more complicated. You know, now we've introduced virtual volumetric efficiency tables. That's got its own ball of wax, and you know, a lot more torque-based stuff.
Right.
And then Gen 5 just goes off the charts. I mean, I feel for a guy that just tries to do that from day one.
Right. Let me ask you this. You brought it up, so I want to know. Drive-by cable throttle bodies, drilling holes in them. What is your thought?
I have never in my life, I've never drilled a hole in a throttle body. And I've tuned some of the nastiest, biggest camshafts in a Gen 3. I've done solid rollers. I've done 440 solid roller, big stuff, like cam start in the 270 to intake duration range, and I've never had to
do that.
drill
Whoever started that
Yeah.
20 years ago, I would like to. If I had a way of purging something from the internet, it would be drilling a hole in the throttle bodies.
There's one car I can think of right now, and I'll never forget it. And I just think it was just one of those devil cars that no matter what you did,
Right.
I had one car that it started. It just, I mean, the IAX pegged at 310. I mean, I had no more control. But, the IAX almost on the floor, basically 5, I mean, it's almost slammed shut at warm idle. So I had nowhere left to go.
Right.
But that was like one of those instances where that car could have used just a hair bit more air. But I'm now knowing what I know now, I could have fixed it.
Right.
It was a fueling problem, something else.
Something is off.
Yeah, something was off. But I mean, there was one car I really struggled with. But I mean, this was 5-10 years ago or something, man. But
I literally ran into a customer the other day. We were having an issue with idle, and I asked, "This throttle body has a hole in it, doesn't it?" He goes, "Yeah, previous owner drilled it." And I was like, "We're fighting it."
Oh yeah.
He goes, "I'll take it off and weld it up." And I said, "Do it. Your life will be easier. There's absolutely no reason." I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going crazy, telling everybody, stop doing this stupid stuff. And that's always been, there was a time where that may have been a legitimate solution because you didn't know any better. But we're beyond that. We can fix that properly now.
Well, we didn't have the tables. I mean, see, that's the other thing that a lot of these guys don't understand. Like, 15 years ago, we had, I don't know, an eighth of the tables.
Advanced mode looked like basic mode.
We were on permanent basic mode. We had no access to anything, man. So we were tuning with a Game Boy.
Right. I opened up one of those oddball tune files for, I don't know, 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder the other day, and I had to go check my settings to be like, wait a second, did I get defaulted back into basic? There's only like 3 tabs. There's only 2 tables per tab.
Yeah, I've done a couple of twin turbo Gen 6 Camaros, the 6-cylinders, recently because I mean they were kind of fun to do actually. But compared to like the
There's
LT,
nothing in those.
Oh man, there's nothing in them. They're so archaic.
No tuning questions. We've got a quiet chat tonight. That's very odd. Normally these people are all over the place and hey, whoever's forecast is the last person that spoke up. Should have done a giveaway tonight.
0 tuning questions.
I know.
That's the limit.
Apparently, everybody's figured it out. I'm going to give away 5 free gifts. Yeah, forecast. That's the whole purpose of this show. It's not to listen to me and Branden ramble on about stuff. It's talk about tuning. So I'm giving away memberships. I hope somebody in the chat wins. Oh, good job. Chevy for Life won. Chris. I don't know if Chris is in here, but he's normally in here. Okay. Talk about E78A.
Oh, the bastardized Gen 5 controller.
Right.
Well, it tunes exactly like a Gen 5 with port injectors.
So this is the 2017 ZR1 controller?
No. This is going to be I want to say this was like the 2014 trucks.
Oh, really?
I can't remember. It's like that. I think it's that oddball ECU where they were just transitioning to Gen 5, but it was still using port injectors, not DI injectors.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like an E40 situation.
It was the E40 of the Gen 4, Gen 5 generation, but correct. And I don't have a file open in front of me, but I think that's what he's referring to.
That's what I'm looking for. See if I've got one in my personal repository here. No, so it's got to be the 2014 6-liter.
I think so. And
that's probably not a file I have.
What's funny is I've tuned a bunch of them really, but when guys started putting camshafts in those, they didn't have a startup airflow table. Okay, so I couldn't get the darn things to start. They would start, they would kind of die and then come to life eventually. But no matter what you did, I had to get HP to add all those tables in there so that we could actually get the thing to start.
So the world can thank you. So it says all the way up to 19,2500 Silverado.
Yep. Oh yeah, I know that ECU well.
I'm looking. I don't think I've got any 6 liter.
It literally lays out identical to a
Oh,
normal
here's one.
Silverado, like Gen 5, but instead of DI, you've just got normal port injectors.
Okay, yep, I just found one. That's very interesting. E92A. No, he's talking about an E78. I'm looking at an
78.
E92.
Yeah.
So that's still direct injection. Well, apparently I'm going to have to do some digging.
I'm pretty sure that's I'm really bad at controllers. Like
I'm the same way.
if you ask me to rattle off, I mean, I do 15 to 20 of these a week, and I still don't.
Give me your make and model, and I'll know what tables are on it.
Yeah, just tell me what it is.
Yeah.
Is it ZR1? Is it a freaking Z06? I mean, I know those better than I know controllers.
Hey, Chevy for life, your prize is still sitting in the back of my truck. Email me your address again so I can mail it to you. I found it again. I cleaned my truck again. It's only been over a year. I'm really bad about sending prizes out. Okay, how would you go about perfecting Gen 4 final airflow minimum and ignition with no idle desired channels for your operating system? So I can talk about final airflow. That's easy. Tune your MAF, then let it idle and see how many pounds per hour that you're rocking, and set that table scaled based on that. So if you're targeting 800 RPMs and it shows that you've got 98 pounds per hour of airflow, bring that whole table up until your 800 column is close to 90 whatever. And if you go too far, it'll hang. If you're too low, it'll stall. As far as ignition goes, I don't know.
I mean, that's pretty much how I go about it. I go about a Gen 4. So I usually will look at a cam spec. And again, it's because I've done so many, I have a good idea where it's going to be to start. But like, let's say Gen 4, let's just say a basic LS3 with a moderate size camshaft. Okay. It's a 230-ish duration cam. I know that thing's probably, and you work in pounds per hour, I work in grams per second. So this is transferable. Just figure out
whichever one you want. Yeah.
Whichever one you want. I like grams per second. So I know that cam is probably going to move somewhere between 10 and 12 grams per second of air at idle. So I'm going to start my base running airflow table from about 400 to about 1,000 at roughly 12. That's at least going to get me fired up, and then I'm going to log what's called idle adapt advance or idle advance adapt. I'm going off of memory here.
Right.
What it'll do is it's going to tell you how much interference the ECU is relaying for spark to control the idle. If it's heavily negative, you have way too much air in that thing. Right. And it's basically ripping your idle timing down to control the idle. If it's really positive, you've got too little air there and you need to raise it up. But the best way, like he said, if it takes 12 grams a second to zero my trims out, roughly 11 to 12 grams is going to be a good number for your base running airflow table. And then scale it up from there. And really the only way you're going to be able to figure that part out is to drive the car.
Right.
Clutch it in, see how it comes to a stop. If it pushes or it hangs and you got too much and you just need to start bleeding that down. Idle timing is a little trickier because Gen 4 stuff is honestly fairly decent stock. 13 to 15 degrees is a good starting point because you need torque reserve.
Right.
If you start getting up into the 18s and 20s on a Gen 4, you're losing the torque reserve. So if the idle ever does dip or it tries to get into a scenario, you're minimizing your torque reserve. So I shoot for anything between 12 to 15 degrees of timing.
Yep.
Preferably around 13 to 15.
Yep. That's my happy zone. And to give you a little more background on that, what he's talking about is fast are predicted and immediate versus fast and slow. So it's called predicted. We call that slow. Immediate, we call that fast. But in layman terms, immediate is spark. Airflow is slow. So whether it's the throttle position or the TPS, that's going to be a slow or predicted change, and that's going to be what is a big change. So 1% blade angle is a huge airflow change. and can cause your idle to go way up, way down, whatever. And so we're trying not to make that 1% change if we can adjust the timing. So obviously whenever you get into heavily cam stuff, your idle's jumping around, there's stuff that you can do to kind of calm that idle down. But we're looking for steady idle as the final. Steady spark is going to match up with that whenever we've hit that. And if we're at the right airflow values, as Branden says, we should be in that 13 to 15 range. And it's even more pronounced whenever you get into virtual torque and stuff like that. I will say probably about 99% of the time, though, if you adjust idle and then go out and adjust your MAF and VE, you're going to have to come back and fix your idle again. It is going to change a little bit. But that's not to say there's no reason not to go out there beforehand, bump it up so you're not dealing with stalling issues. Then whenever it starts hanging, you can start walking it back down, etc. So these are just little things you learn as you go.
I tell people the same thing every time. I'd rather you start with too much base running airflow because the timing will pull it down. It'll control it within reason. I mean, it's hard to have. You'd have to be way out in left field to really get that thing to hang.
Right.
But get it running and get it up to operating temp. Obviously, make sure your fuel trims aren't negative 50 or positive 50, but you want to get your airflow model lined out first. That's the most important thing because you're wasting your time chasing air and spark if that's not even lined out yet. Because as he said, if you get it idle and happy and then your fuel trims or anything is way out in left field and you get it back in line, you're probably going to have to come in and redo your idle and spark again. But I mean, spark in theory, there's a couple ways you can go about it, but the long and short of it is 15 is usually a good spot, but realistically you can look at your map value, which is vacuum in the motor, and you want to kind of raise the spark up until the vacuum kind of plateaus. Basically, you're making the more vacuum the engine has, the happier it's essentially getting. But there's also I want chop, I want it to do this. Right. The more spark, the less chop, the less lope you're going to have, etc. So, but that's all manipulatable too. So
here's a great question for you from Tim. Says my 2011 Camaro V6 has no way to put an open loop, so I created math for mass airflow plus long terms. I'm guessing he actually means wideband air plus long terms.
There's always ways into open loop. Pull one of those O2 sensors right out of there and just it'd probably fail right into open loop.
Well, I was about to say, even if you just unplugged one, it would go into open loop, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So would that be your process as opposed to using EQ error and fuel trims? I wouldn't use long terms. I'd use short terms, and there's probably still a way to disable long terms on those and have the short terms enabled. I don't know without looking at them.
I try never to conflict with any. Everybody's got their own way of doing it. I'll personally give you mine. Some people might think it's right. Some people might think it's wrong. I like using trims for my idle and part throttle, and I'll tell you why. Especially if you're new at this. If you have a really good wideband, it's kind of a different story. But I know guys where their wideband, there's a leak or something, they're not exactly dead on. They do the process is correct. They put it in open loop.
Right.
They start driving down the road and using their wideband to dial their trims in. And I see this question all the time. Man, I use my wideband. I got my trims all within 1%. I turn closed loop back on and they're way out in left field. You were pretty much cowling around an error most likely.
Right.
So I tend to like to use the trims because at the end of the day, my trims, I need to make my trims happy. If the trims aren't happy, I mean, I've had instances where, the wideband, especially big camp cars, that wideband is going to be way out in left field at idle and kind of low speed, part throttle stuff.
Right.
So I rely on the trims more than I do that. But it can also have the same effect on trims. So, but at the end of the day, I like to use the trims for idle and part throttle. And then when I start doing transition stuff or getting into PE, 100%, I'm relying on the wideband.
Right. And that's always been my mentality. Global B is a little bit different, though.
I tune Global B the same way.
Global B, I seem to have luck with leaving the short terms active and applying those errors.
Mm-hmm.
but I'm still drawing conclusions, so I'm not going to say that I'm going to stick with that methodology for Global B. I may go back to full blown open loop and just going off the wideband because originally, and even on here on this channel, I mean, we've been around for almost 6 years now. I want to say the first 2 years, 3 years, I was all about turn off closed loop. And I had too many people coming by being like, "Oh, you don't need to do that." And I'm like, "Well, I understand what you're saying, but you're adding too many complications into the stew, as it were. And whenever you do that, you just don't know what's coming out. Like it's not as reliable, in my opinion."
Well, I'll tell you my flip side to this. I like to use the trims because I can spot leaks very quickly. So if I've got a bank split, so here's the again, this is experience versus no experience. I know you would probably catch this whether you're an open loop or closed loop, but you put it in open loop, okay, and you got the wideband on one bank. Everything's hunky dory, right? You go turn your trims on, and one bank's way leaner than the other bank, and you're like, "What the hell's going on?" Well, you got a leak, so you got a vacuum leak, you got something else going on. So I also use it to, I mean, you can do it with the wideband too, but I also look at the airflow model to determine leaks and whatnot too. But that's just my methodology of it because most people are going to have a wideband in one bank and one bank only, and they don't know what's going on in the other bank.
Yeah. And that's not to say that you should go out and buy a second wideband right this moment. You're on a factory setup. You can't tune bank to bank anyways, so you don't have control over that on most applications. But there should be sanity, and the factory sensor ones will give you that sanity check that they're on the same page.
Yeah.
Listen, there's not a car out there that doesn't have a leak somewhere. It's whether or not the leak's big enough to cause some skewing and end up biting you in the ass later down the road.
That's the $1 million answer right there. I have this debate with shops day in and day out. I've almost come to have an acceptable tolerance from bank to bank.
Yeah.
Because if you're truly chasing perfection, you're going to be there for a long time. And most guys are going to give up before you achieve it.
Right. It reminds me of whenever I used to work on F-15s and I'd tell the guys, they're like, we're going to need 3 extra days. And they'd be like, why? Well, the heat exchanger's cracked. How do you know? You haven't even taken out. Every heat exchanger's cracked. Literally. If I look close enough, I will find a crack on that thing somewhere that will require us to pull it out. So we might as well just take the 3 days and do it right.
Yep.
So Eric asks, LQ9, swapping a C10. Still very new to this. Would you guys recommend keeping the stock wiring harness and PCM or use an aftermarket setup like Holley? Branden, you want to weigh in on this first?
Holley simplifies things a lot of the time, but if it's properly done on a factory ECU, I mean, I tune a ton of them. And I think the biggest problem with swap guys is they use a cheap harness or a no name or an unreputable harness company.
Right.
And that's where the nightmare starts to come in, and that's where the nightmare ensues. The other aspect is from a tuning perspective, they can be a ball. You can open up a can of worms. Usually those I'll have to typically end up speed density tuning them because they'll use some homemade intake that sits right in front of a fan, has turbulence out the yin yang. You're not going to get a good signal, whatever the case may be. I do high end swaps all the time. Like I do Barrett Jackson stuff. I just did a 69 Camaro that was, $400,000. But man, the swap was top notch shape. It was a factory ECU tuned like factory. But it depends on the level of the swap and the quality of the parts of the swap, and the harness is undoubtedly the most important thing. You get a bad harness, man, and you're chasing wiring gremlins, you're in for a bad day.
Yeah, and I'm going to come at this from a different angle. I'm going to say, Eric, if you are wanting to get into tuning, get a decent swap harness and run off the factory PCM. If you're just wanting to get this thing up and running and then ignore it, I'd probably go standalone. Yeah,
I think the other thing is if you're, I hate to use the 3-letter words, but if you start talking, EPA and having to get into, passing vehicle emissions and making it emissions compliant, I'm gonna give another vote for the factory ECU, because you can make everything compliant through that and do it the correct way. Whereas a standalone, you're gonna have a hard time with that. But standalone, the flip side is you got a lot more safety control with a standalone. So you got active wideband feedback, so it's a lot harder to hurt something.
Right.
I say harder. You can still be a cowboy in there and hurt something, but you've at least got closed loop feedback where it'll keep you somewhat on target. But there's more stuff involved. You got to verify timing. You got to make your own. You got to do static timing checks to make sure timing's where it's supposed to be. But from a harness perspective, Holley stuff is pretty repeatable. I've had Holley quirks too. But
oh yeah, I had to repin a Holley harness last weekend.
I'm 50-50 on that. I think 6 or 7 out of 10 times. I can't say 50-50. I'd probably go for the factory ECU.
Well, it's so cost being what it is, you're saving over $2,000 right on the get go.
Yeah.
And that's still accounting that you're paying $600 or $700 for a good harness. You're still going to save $2,000 over almost any standalone out there. And it'll do, depending on what you're wanting to do, it takes a while before you start getting into crazy stuff that it's not going to get it done. So the project is going to dictate that more than anything, but the intent of what you're trying to do is going to also, as I said, my buddy Justin did his C10 and he just wanted a truck that run, and so he threw a Terminator on it and had no issues. I would rather cut my legs off before putting a Terminator on something. And so I'm going to put a stock ECU on there. If it's a project that's going to be crazy enough, I'm looking for an ECU that has race capabilities, or, some of the more fancy stuff that you're not getting out of the cheaper standalones, traction control, nitrous control, etc. So.
Yeah, I guess I should have asked that question too, is what's the setup? If it's just a heads cam, 6 liter, I'm going to use a stock ECU all day long, something like that. If it's got an 88 millimeter hanging off of it, or it's going to be a 300 shot, I like the matrix control significantly better than through a standalone than I would anything else. So but from a drivability aspect, I will argue this pretty much till I'm dead, but I think the stock ECU provides much better drivability characteristics.
Oh, I agree 1,000%.
Over a standalone. You can make standalones run pretty good, but they're not going to have the good idle control and drivability control that I think a factory ECU does.
It seems like I see more people doing Band-Aid stuff for idle and parking lot control on standalones than should be necessary. But as I said, it doesn't have as much of the stuff going on in the background for control, where we're used to dealing with. There's 5 or 6 systems all in play that are manipulating idle control. Whenever we talk about standalones, you're talking generally just IAC and Spark, those 2 things, if you even have an IAC on it. So
I find the IAC control in the Terminators to be very, very cumbersome. I don't feel like they work all the time. Or they have very weird quirks to them. I have a love-hate relationship with that ECU and idle control. Now you put a 4500 on a C6Z with M1 methanol on a 4500. Screw an IAC. I don't need that thing.
Right.
Like race car stuff, no big deal. But it's like the guys that want the nice daily driver stuff. They want them to run like factory. I struggle. The idle control is a little lackluster to me to get everything I want or what I would expect out of a factory running vehicle.
Right. We're going to start the wrap up. We're 40 minutes in already. Time flies when you're having fun. Forecast has you guys deal with German cars over in the U.S. We don't. I don't think Branden really does any import stuff anymore. I used to do Japanese cars.
I've considered getting into the more exotic market. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if I'm supposed to say it yet, but a little birdie has potentially told me that McLaren will be supported through HP.
You said it, not me.
Yep.
You said on me. I didn't break any NDAs today.
I didn't need. Well, there's no NDA. Nobody's ever told me anything.
Okay.
It's just hearsay at this point. But I think they're going to work on breaking into the the more exotic market. So I think that would be pretty cool. And I would love to get into like tuning some of the Porsches and Ferraris and McLaren.
It's a shame that the only Porsche is supported is the 2015-16 GT3s.
So
I wish there was a bigger market, and I've yelled this into the abyss so many times. Like, nobody gives a shit about your Volkswagen Peugeot. Like, why are we not doing Porsches? Like,
so crazy thing. I had a guy. He actually took some of our GM stuff, and I helped him out on a couple cars. He's over in, I think, Kuwait. But I get on the guys, like I start talking to him, and he's got like GTRs and Ferraris and GT3s in his shop. I'm like, dude, do you tune these? He's like, yeah. I'm like, what's it like tuning a GT3? Because I've always wanted to get involved in one. He goes, it's very Ford-esque, but dumbed down. So it's like, he goes, it's way easier than a Coyote, but it's very Coyote-esque.
Makes sense. And this is the last question for the night because I know it's an easy answer. Kamar asks, going to be firing up my twin turbo 408. Notice my new HP Tuner's core ECU has a connector for a barometric sensor. What is that? It's just another map sensor. Put a 1 bar on there and let it dangle.
It is a very important sensor that, if used correctly, will make cranking fuel and cranking airflow changes for barometric changes. So if you go up in the mountains, so where you can actually figure out how important that is disconnect one on a Gen 5 and tell me how it runs.
Yeah. Well, it's half of all fuel calculations on Gen 5.
Yeah. Yeah, so it can be a very useful sensor, but yeah, like you said, put a 1 bar on that thing and I would almost put it out to atmosphere somewhere in the engine bay, and it'll be used in if you use it correctly. There's great calculations that can be based off of that.
It is very helpful, and so it is very critical on systems that are utilizing pressure ratio, and essentially it's just comparing it to the manifold pressure a lot of the times to make corrections. You've got to realize, Kamar, on top of it, we're in more so on factory ECUs, we're taking into all kinds of pressures. Manifold pressure versus fuel pressure is calculated, so you get a delta P across the actual injector itself. That's why we've got the fuel systems that we have now, the returnless systems, because we can actually calculate that delta P changing as the throttle body opens up. And all that is very important, and it's stuff that you can't do really on standalones. And that's where that amazing drivability that Branden was talking about doesn't exist on standalones, but all the factory stuff, later stuff, it's all in there, and it makes a huge difference on getting the most pleasing drive, right?
My mind goes so far in so many directions, though, and I forget that there's a lot of people that just simplify, but I start thinking of like, well, what if I put it in an airplane? Well, the airplane's going to have altitude changes of,
significantly more,
10,000 feet up in the air. I mean, that's where I would start looking at like baro sensors and stuff, but it's and fueling multipliers, I guess, based off of stuff like that. But
exactly,
honestly, for a standalone, it's probably not referenced very often.
No, no.
I just went way off the deep end.
Yeah, I know. We did. Okay. We're going to wrap it up. I want to thank everybody, as always, for turning out. We're starting a new season, so we're going to try and get back on track of being online every Thursday night live. Branden will be back. He's a semi-regular now. He's too busy to become a full-time regular, but we're going to have him back multiple times. Get your questions ready.
If I can stop tuning cars as much as I do and get more into teaching, then I can become more of a regular, but it's hard to do both.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to find all the time. And I actually took yesterday, today, and tomorrow off from work, and is the closest thing that I've had to a vacation, and it's because I've got other crap I've got to get caught up on. I just don't have enough time. I have to take time off of one job to work on other jobs.
I have no idea what a vacation is.
Yeah. Weren't you just up in Kentucky or something?
and I was tuning the whole time.
Okay. Listen, everybody. Thanks as always. We'll see you next week. And ABT, always be tuning.